Hi, I'm Marty Nemko. I've taken lately to interspersing my usual how-to videos with some piano playing, but also reading some essays that I really love in an abridged version. I think YouTube is good in basically 5-minute blocks. So I've taken this one I really like. It's called On Solitude, and it's written by Sarah Fay, and I think it's worth your 5 minutes. The change came less as a chrysalis moment, an instant of emerging and blossoming, than, after weeks of distress. My apartment at the time was in the rear of the building, away from the street. Even by studio standards, it was tiny. The kitchen too close to the bed practically touching the bookshelf, and the desk. It had a slight view of Chicago's skyline, but mainly looked onto a brick wall. My immediate neighbors kept to themselves. They were presences, a series of doors opening and closing. I'd lived contentedly in that remove. It suited me. Then it didn't. Naturally, I blamed my apartment, the claustrophobic lack of square footage, the oppressive brick wall. The moment I walked in the door, I felt a crushing weight on my chest, followed by a pit in my stomach. My environment had to be the cause. In his essay on solitude, the 16th century essayist Michel de Montaigne disagrees. Quote, "Our disease lies in the mind, which cannot escape from itself," end quote. Finding contentment in solitude requires self-reliance. Ralph Waldo Emerson would later agree, though he remained very much engaged in public life. Montaigne advised us to keep a, quote, back shop, a private room within the self where others can't enter. Plaster and wood have nothing to do with it. We must have a, quote, mind pliable in itself that will be company. My inner back shop had somehow transformed from a place of solitude to one of isolation and loneliness. The ideal of solitude is strength. It's a skill to be mastered, the ability to be alone without feeling lonely. I should say, by the way, that these are excerpts, as I said, 5 minutes worth, not the full thing. It's righteous. It's Benjamin Rush, the physician and founding father, who once called solitude a mechanical means of promoting virtue. It's a source of wisdom. It's the Buddha on the path to enlightenment, Jesus and Moses in the desert, Muhammad on the mountain. It's Thomas Merton, abandoning the vacuous debaucheries of New York for the Trappist Abbey of Gethsemane in Kentucky. As he writes in Thoughts in Solitude, quote, "When society is made up of men who know no interior solitude, it can no longer be held together by love, and consequently it is held together by a violent and abusive authority," end quote. For Merton, quote, interior solitude is essential. Looking back, that time I spent in solitude is bracketed. That's how it's punctuated for me for now. 4 years. That's how long I spent in what could only be called solitude. It might best be called urban solitude. I resided among people, passing them on the street, but never engaged. Not once did I dine out or go to the movies or to a museum. I held a job, 12 hours a week, 30 weeks of the year. I taught English at a university. I worked out at a gym. I visited my mother. But that was pretty much it. I saw no friends and rarely talked on the phone, even breaking off a friendship with someone who lived in another city and wanted to speak once a week to stay connected, because that much contact was unaccountably burdensome to me. Not a single vacation or journey, not even a quick trip to get out of the city. In fact, I rarely went out of 5-mile radius. Same bed, same breakfast, lunch and dinner table, same desk, same walls. Not once in those 4 years was I lonely. Brackets emit a feeling of enclosure, which is how I now see those 4 remote years, walled off, the self alone with the self, inside the self. And social media? It made me neither connected nor alone. My followers on Twitter were in the double digits. I had hundreds and hundreds of friends on Facebook whom I didn't know, even by name. I didn't have an Instagram account. How many artistic and abstract photos of my brick walls could I post? Still, when I did go on social media, solitude didn't make me immune to its effects. Facebook disheartened me, and Twitter overwhelmed me, just as they sometimes do to other people. In Combating Loneliness, Sherry Turkle and a Cygnus study agree that social media is less a factor than the quality of our interactions, and merely having people in our lives does little. 1 in 4 Americans feel misunderstood. 2 in 5 don't think that their relationships are meaningful, and only half report having meaningful interactions on a daily basis. Each day during my solitude, or isolation, or loneliness, I went for a walk. My route through the park was relatively secluded. In the winter it was downright desolate. It was always the same, under the bridge, north along the lagoon, past the driving range, to the harbor and back. I don't recall communing with nature. I barely saw the red-winged blackbirds and the monarch butterflies, and didn't notice until much later that an entire row of trees had died as a result of a beetle infestation. Just the route comes to mind, the repetition and orderliness of following the same path, there and back, there and back. I may have been outdoors, but I was still inside myself, blocked off. Looking back, that time I spent in solitude is bracketed. That is how it's punctuated for me for now. Though some grammarians say that brackets include unnecessary information, this is far from true. Brackets represent our internal lives, our deepest secrets. Rarely do we use brackets this way. Most grammarians would opt for commas or dashes, yet brackets occupy the primary position on which 2 keys on the QWERTY keyboard, while parentheses, which we use more often, are relegated to secondary positions on the 9 and the 0 keys. Perhaps we don't communicate through brackets to avoid experiencing the depths of ourselves. Commas are but speed bumps of separation. Dashes are practically invitations to enter, and parentheses ask us to step over and inside. Brackets, on the other hand, are walls. Although the emergence from solitude, or isolation, or loneliness wasn't a chrysalis moment, a particular morning stands out in my memory as marking the before and after. One day in late January, I woke to the sound of the wind whistling through the unsealed gaps in my windows. I pulled up the shades to find them covered in frost. I couldn't see outside, couldn't even glimpse the neighboring brick wall. The weather app shows a feels-like temperature of -40 degrees. Normally, this would have been just another day in the apartment. I ate breakfast, wrote for a while, and graded papers. I had just finished washing my spoon and cereal bowl when my skin started to itch. I scratched my forearms, inciting the itch. Soon my skin was red and puffy. I put Cordate on it, and the itching went away a bit. Back at my desk, sitting at the computer, the shades drawn to keep out the cold, my apartment felt oppressively small. The walls didn't close in so much as I became more aware of their closeness than ever before. I tugged at my turtleneck. My mouth went dry. It felt like I couldn't swallow. My only thought was, out. I stood at the glass door entrance of my building, which wasn't covered in frost, and peered out at what might have been a portrait of extinction. No cars passed on the streets, no pedestrians on the sidewalk. Whereas once being cut off wouldn't have fazed me, a wave of solitude and isolation and loneliness crashed over me. I saw in my reflection a woman very much alone, ready to reach out. That force, a reach more powerful than the one that had pulled me into myself, propelled me out. It wasn't pleasant. I became increasingly distressed. My whole default mode was ruptured. I felt exposed, my brick walls and frosted windows demolished. My life was no longer bracketed in the same way. Eventually, I settled into new patterns. A reasonable part of my day was spent in the company of others, family, acquaintances, colleagues, strangers. And I didn't just notice people, I took note of them. The cashier at the grocery store, the person behind me in line, my Uber driver, the couple at a nearby table. Each day, on returning to my building, I rode the elevator and stood in silence with my neighbors. Most of them stared down at their phones. When we reached my floor, I'd wish them a good evening, smile, and try to make eye contact with at least one person. Some responded with surprise, others like I startled them. One guy furrowed his brow with annoyance, as if I had invaded his personal space, or solitude, or isolation, or loneliness, as if I'd trespassed his brackets. Some made eye contact and wished me the same. Others responded with a mechanical, "You too," without glancing up from their phones. It didn't take meaningful interactions to curb my loneliness. Noticing other people was enough. My "have a good evening" and "have a good one" communications were enough. What even constitutes a meaningful interaction? What degree of intimacy does it require? What emotions do we need to experience before, during, and after it to qualify? Holding people to such high standards, or any standards, seems to invite loneliness. Which isn't to say I didn't feel lonely. I did. Returning to my apartment filled me with dread, especially in the winter when I was met by late afternoon darkness. Loneliness seemed to wait by the door to welcome me home. But the feeling, and loneliness is a feeling, not a fact, passed. In any event, I do thank you for watching. I'm Marty Nemko. I welcome your thumbs up and accept your thumbs down. I always look forward to your comments, and especially like it if you hit the share button below. Share on your social media so that my efforts can have broader impact. And I am flattered if you choose to subscribe to my channel. In any event, I do thank you for watching. I am Marty Nemko.